start out with, well, start with Romans here. Visible things of him from the creation of the world are clearly seen. That's the natural world around us. Being understood by the things that are made, even his eternal power, and the Godhead, so that they are without excuse. So to translate this into English, basically what it is saying is that when we study the world around us, the creation of the world, we clearly see evidence for the Creator. And science should be, and is for some people, the doorway to the Creator. In my case, that was true. This is an interesting quote, which hopefully you've heard before, but Richard Dawkins is probably one of the most aggressive anti-creationists in the world. And he recently admitted, even though he hates Christians and Muslims and everybody else, well, not hates, but doesn't like us, actively opposes us, but he says there are no Christians, as far as I know, blowing up buildings. I'm not aware of any Christian suicide bombers. No Christian denomination believes the penalty for apostasy is death. I have mixed feelings about the decline of Christianity so far, as Christianity might be a bulwark against something worse. So this is really quite a testimony from one of the most famous atheists in the world, and he's openly an atheist. Okay, my background was, my father was an atheist, agnostic. Most atheists do not come out and say, hi, I'm an atheist. They know that's not polite. The vast majority of atheists might say things like, I'm not a believer, or even, I don't go to church, or even, well, your religion's okay, but I just have other concerns in my life besides Christianity. And so my father was the same way. I never heard him say he was an atheist, but I think he was. And a good example was my mother had me go to Sunday school when I was about 5 with my brother, and there I was able to see the gospel presented on a felt board, and I remember in my heart agreeing with the salvation message. I was about 5. And in many ways, that never left me, even though I did embrace, to some degree, atheism. I'm really more like a prodigal son. Went home, left home, went out and blew all my inheritance on wine, women, and song, and whatever else they spent their money on in those days. And as a result, realized that there's something wrong. In many ways, and by the way, when I present this presentation, I'm amazed at how many people come up to me and say, this is my story. In a way, there's an advantage because I've been on both sides. It's like when you criticize a country you've never been in. And I've seen both sides, because I was on both sides, and I got along really well with the atheists. Madelyn Murray O'Hair, the most infamous atheist in the world at that time, she published everything I wrote. And she told me, you're a catch. You're doing good work. You're doing good articles. And so I never had a negative experience, although Madelyn Murray O'Hair can be a really nasty person. I could give you one incident. Her son left atheism, became a Christian, and as a result, she mentioned to me, I'm never going to speak to him again. And my response was, he's your son. I mean, he may not agree with you anymore, but he's your son. And therefore, well, she looked at me and said, I don't care. I'm never going to speak to him again. And as far as I know, she never did speak to him again. So when I went to Sunday school at age 5, around that, and I remember it was on Greenfield Road and 13 Mile Road, right on the corner. I remember very well the experience. And my dad then blew his top, and that was the beginning and the end of my church going. He did not want me to be involved in a church. My first love was books, going to used bookstores. I read about a book a week for years, and that is an important point in that so many people accept evolution uncritically and they have never read much of the other side. A lot of people, they go to school, they read the textbooks, or what they have to of them, and then they take the test, they get their degrees, and they move on. How many people really carefully look at both sides? Not many people do, and I did, and that was one thing that helped me, because as I read more and more about evolution, I realized there are really big problems. In fact, there's an argument what we should teach in the schools. Some people say we should teach the two-model theory. We should teach the creation worldview and the evolution worldview. I disagree with that. I think what we need to do is explain why evolution is not true, cannot be true, and the harm that it has done. Because that's where the facts lay. And hopefully some of you, of course I know I'm probably preaching to the choir, but hopefully some of you are saying, well, I don't know about that. There's a lot of facts. In fact, there's a well-known creationist who says over and over, there are gobs and gobs of evidence for evolution, but there really is not. And you don't know that until you look carefully at both sides. Okay, why left the faith? I remember very well my colleague's genetics class. Even though the book never mentioned evolution, and actually the professor did not mention evolution much, but he did state that we evolved, that was fact, and if you want to be a scientist, you better believe it. And I remember he was a big man, Cornell University graduate, very imposing man, and when he lectured, he paced back and forth and made it very clear that evolution was fact. You better believe it, period. And that is common in colleges. One thing that did impress me was my paleoanthropology book, and there they had pictures of the precursors of humans. Well, I have a picture here. That's what I saw. Looks like facts. I mean, how can you sit there and deny the facts? You've got the skulls. These are clearly ape-like people. Therefore, it must be true. There are many other pictures which were in my paleontology books, which basically appeared to me that they had the evidence. There they were. How can you deny it? When I looked at the evidence, a few examples, the Piltdown Man, when I was a young man, was shown to be false, but still it came up a lot. Still was accepted partially. They had a lot of work to revise the textbooks. It was still there. And Neanderthal was still, until recently, seen as clear evidence of cavemen who were less evolved than we are. And the one area which interests me greatly, I'm from Detroit, and they clearly had good evidence in inferior races. And I remember in so many of my textbooks having pictures of African Americans who were clearly ape-like. So how can you deny evolution when we have living examples of less evolved people all around us? Now, it wasn't said quite that blatantly, but that's the implication. And my father, of course, that's the beliefs I learned from him. I should mention, my father was a very good person. He was one who never answered questions. He used the Socratic method. And I would ask my father some science question. He was a scientist, had a degree from Wayne State University. And when I would ask him a question, he would not give me the answer. He would say, well, what do you think the answer is? Well, I don't know. That's why I'm asking you. He said, well, and then he would explain to me the problem, and he would help me figure out the answer. And when I would ask him, for example, about how gravity works, he would explain it in such a way. For example, do heavier, larger balls fall faster towards the earth than smaller, lighter balls? Well, intuition says the heavier ball falls down faster. But we know that's not true. And he helped me explain it, helped me see that, which probably, and I have to admit, a lot of my interest in science came from my father, even though he was an atheist. And when we went places, it was to like the Engineering Society of Detroit or the museums, which of course featured science. Since I have left the atheist movement, it was very important to me to stress why, and I have 2 books which I cover this, namely, Darwinism is the Doorway to Atheism. And the best example is when I was involved in the atheist movement, I asked Madelyn Murray O'Hair why we spend so much time in our atheist journals covering evolution. We're atheists. Let's talk about the wonders of atheism. What do we have all these articles on evolution for? And she said these words, because Darwinism is the doorway to atheism. That's how we convert people to atheism, by convincing them there is no need for a creator besides evolution. Evolution becomes the creator. And so, as I have read, it's very clear that Darwin's goal was to murder God. Those are his words. How do you murder God? You destroy the reason people believe in God. Why do people believe in God? Done lots of surveys. They asked atheists, and others have done many surveys. They asked 1,000 people, why do you believe in God? Invariably, they say because of the beauty of the natural world, the sky, the trees, the birds, the animals, etc. I believe in a creator because I see all around me the wonders of creation. And that's why they believe in God. And by the way, Darwin knew that because he studied Paley in college. Then it was required, and that was Paley's main argument. We believe in God because of, well, the example he used was a watch. When you see a watch, you know it was made. When you see an insect, an animal, or study the human body, you know it was designed, it was made. Therefore, Darwin knew to murder God, you have to come up with another creator. And that other creator he came up with was evolution. Evolution became the creator. And that's basically why Darwinism is the doorway to atheism. If you can talk this deep to people about why they became an atheist, many will not say openly, but if you get to know people, they will say, as I did when I was an atheist, they will say, because there's no need for a God. That science has put God out of business. He doesn't have a job anymore. Now, I know a lot of people can accept evolution and also accept Christianity. But in a sense, you're melding 2 things together that really don't fit together. They're called theistic evolutionists. And theistic evolutionists are often simply evolution, the core, with a thin coat around the core of Christianity. And you see this a lot in the world. On the other hand, are they really being consistent in accepting Christianity and evolution? Now, I know you can do that. I have friends that do that. But is that really being consistent? The other book I have here is Science is the Doorway to the Creator. And that is my story. You can't really study the creation without realizing that, indeed, it was created. I'm reading a book now which is kind of interesting. It has a whole section on carbon. And he says that there must be a God because of carbon. And then he goes into detail and says no other element at all will do all the things that carbon does. If there was no carbon, there would be no life. And he explains that in 2 or 3 pages, why carbon is really critically important. And of course, if you study biochemistry, which I did, you know how central carbon is. And you know without carbon, we're not going to have life. So if there's no carbon, no life. So when God was creating the world, he must have thought, let's see now, to make mankind, the world, etc., I've got to have an element that does all these things, so he invented carbon. He also invented water. And water does many strange things. It freezes and floats. Most things, they freeze and they sink. But carbon works in a certain way, and water also works in a certain way so that there is life. And so in many ways, when I talk about science is the doorway to the Creator, just study carbon. You know there's a Creator because we have an element that just does not fit the rules, but yet is important for life. I read atheist literature vociferously, published lots of articles, talked about Madelyn Murray O'Hair. I also worked with Gordon Stein, who was anonymous, and we had good relations. Gary DeYoung was not very accepted in the atheist movement, but I thought he was a very creative God. Why did I leave Christianity and accept atheism? One was Crusades, Nazism, Galileo, burning of Bruno, etc. And in time I realized all these claims were false. And I'll just give you a few examples. We hear a lot about the Inquisition, how awful it was. The Inquisition was to replace other methods of determining guilt. Other methods were, you put a hot piece of iron in oil, and you have to reach your hand into the oil, which is burning, and pull the iron out without burning your hand. If your hand didn't burn, you were innocent. If your hand burned, you were guilty. That's called trial by ordeal. And that was a common way of determining guilt. Now the Inquisition came along and said, no, we need to inquire. We need to find out. We need to get witnesses. We need to do a survey. We need to talk to the neighbors. We need to look at evidence. So the Inquisition was literally to inquire. And in this country, our system is based on the Inquisition. And it's just over and over we talk about people are tortured by the Inquisition and so on. And if you read the rules of the Inquisition, they said torture is not a good idea because many guilty people will deny their guilt under pain. Some innocent will claim their guilt under pain. Doesn't work. And so you have to inquire about what's going on. In fact, in Britain, they call a research for evidence of criminality an inquiry. So that they go through an inquiry. Same word. We've changed it for some reason. We call it investigation, but actually it's an inquiry. And another concern was they saw only the bad in Christianity and Christians, like Nazism, for example. But Nazism is an area I've written quite a bit about, and the simple fact is, if people obeyed the Scriptures, because there are dozens, which Christ made it very clear, war is wrong, we should love our enemies, he who takes up the sword will perish by the sword, lots of Scriptures which make it very clear, if the church followed the Scriptures, there would not have been Nazism. Wouldn't have occurred. Very clear. In fact, there's a German producer who did a film on Nazism, very well done, and over he says, and he has Christ walking, if we would listen to the words of Christ, we wouldn't have had Nazism, we wouldn't have had World War II, and the film is, 4 hours long, and there must have been 20 times where he made that very clear that if we follow Christianity, and he quotes the Scriptures, there would not have been Nazism, there would not have been World War II. So the problem of Nazism was not Christians, the problem was we're not following Christianity. We're ignoring Christianity. And if you think about it, the wars in Europe, they have been warring perpetually, and basically you have Christians killing Christians. Well, they're not following, of course, Christianity. And it shouldn't surprise you because the Bible says what? In the latter days, some will fall away from the faith, and they won't follow it. But now some, the Amish I know, they, by and large, believe the Bible, and they do not go to war. And so why did World War II occur? Why did many, many wars occur? Because we're not following Christianity. So they see only the bad in Christians. Really what they see is only Christians who are not behaving like Christians. And that's why it is really so important that we behave like Christians. One other thing I should mention is that I have 10 grandchildren. I've written almost 60 books, 2,000 articles. I have not been able to influence my grandkids. One example. They live in Lindenhurst. It's about 4 hours away from me. And my grandson studied evolution in his biology textbook. His biology textbook said things like, why is evolution true? Because we have about 100 organs that have no function. The appendix, the tonsils, the adenoids, the thymus, the thyroid, etc. They have no function. And I read that, and that's not true. I've written a whole book on that. So I mailed a copy of the book to my grandson. My son called me up and said, look, he's got to get through school. He doesn't need to be fighting about these things. And I took the book away. I don't want him to read it. Let him believe in evolution. It doesn't matter. So all my 10 grandkids, and this, by the way, is so common when I go to creation groups like this. I have a lot of grandparents there who are there because they're concerned about their grandchildren. And therefore, what can I do? I don't want to upset my son, right? And it's, in a sense, it's true, as my son said. You want him to have trouble? Just put down the answers. What's the function of the appendix? It has no function. Get your grade, go on to college, move on, and don't argue. And that is so, so, so common. My own grandkids. What do? You do what you can. Okay. What can be done? One thing that can be done is, I know most pastors spend their time covering the missionary journeys of Paul, the 7 churches, and all that's fine. But in the olden days, if you went to seminary in the 16, 15, 14, 1300s, you would have 2 tracks. One track would be theology. The other would be natural theology. And if you take a book that's titled Natural Theology, and I have many, you open it up, what's in there? Botany, biology, zoology, etc. So in the olden days, pastors would spend time covering God's Word, and they also would spend time covering God's works because they were trained in that. All the early scientists got their scientific background. This is true in Darwin's day, and that's true with Darwin as well. Darwin got his scientific knowledge from his theological studies at the seminary. Darwin only has 1 degree from a seminary, and that's where he got his knowledge about science. And so, ideally, pastors need to spend some time talking about the wonders of creation and why evolution is not true. The fact is, how many pastors can do that? Not very many at all. And therefore, that has been my function and function of other people. I've spent my lifetime reading books about this issue. I'm looking forward to somebody asking a question I can't answer. But I'm going to call my wife up. There's a question today, guy gave me, and I couldn't answer it. I'm so excited. I don't know what to do. That's never happened. Every question people ask, I can answer easily without looking anything up, because after 40 years in this, you get to know pretty much all the same questions, and you can answer them usually pretty well. And therefore, the goal is for churches, and I know a lot of pastors don't like to give up their preaching time, but ideally, you need to have at least some well-done sermons on the natural world, on natural theology. And that's tragic. Now, churches that do that, many Baptists do. Many churches I go to are Baptist. Many Calvary Chapel churches support that, and so they do bring speakers in to cover this material. Okay, moving on. Some of this I can... with PowerPoint, unfortunately, you can sit here and read it, and people tell me, don't sit there and read it. That just takes it away. Okay, 2021, 70% of Americans were creationists. About half all scientists believe the Bible is an ancient book of fables. I am a little bit outdated in this. Now it is less than 50% of Americans now claim to be creationists. So since this is probably a few years old, but the current data just a couple weeks ago, less than 50% of all Americans are creationists now. Why are we losing? We're losing because we're not getting the message out there, partially because at least we can get it in the churches. And by and large, most churches don't welcome this. They want to present the gospel. One church that I have gone to often, which does present this, he presents the gospel at every service. And 9 people attended last time I was there. And I was told that everybody that attended were his children and their spouses. And he presents the gospel at every service. That's okay, and we should present the gospel, but sometimes we should present the other gospel. Okay, fully 98.7% of evolutionary biologists do not accept God as defined by most Americans. So evolutionary biologists, by and large, have taken up the evolution banner. Okay, the problem is we are the product of an intelligent designer, or we are not the product of an intelligent designer. And therefore, in America now, the slight majority of Americans believe we're not the product of an intelligent designer. We're the product of mutations, produces genetic variety, and natural selection selects that genetic variety. That genetic variety can be good, neutral, or bad. If it's good, natural selection selects it, and therefore mutations is the means that we evolve. So you are, in essence, they don't put it this way, but this is what they teach. In essence, you are the result of billions of mistakes. Okay, the anti-Christian movement, that is a big problem that we have. And I think if we played our cards right, we could change that. Because, well, this is a fastback. Next slide, I'll show that. This is a fastback I wrote when I was teaching at Bowling Green State University. That's what I looked like when I was young and handsome. And now, unfortunately, aging since then, but this is Phi Delta Kappa, it's a fastback. This sold hundreds of thousands of copies. And in here, I basically explain that, indeed, creation has the evidence, evolution does not. So you can get this stuff out there if you work at it. And you may find it interesting that my colleagues at Bowling Green State University did not like this at all. In fact, they got very upset when I published this. Okay, this lecture, I say, is illegal in public high schools. In other words, if I said the same thing I just said to you, it would be a problem. Slaughter of the Distance is the first book I wrote in this area. I also did an article, Toledo Blade. The Toledo Blade is the major newspaper in Toledo, and it's a circulation of, I don't know, probably 500,000. Okay? And in this article, it basically pointed out that there's a problem with discrimination against creationists. How do evolutionists see this? They see this as evolution is fact. It's the basis of all knowledge, and to raise a person into the science field, to educate a person in the science field, you have to have the foundation of evolution.